Good evening, and welcome to another episode of 7 Steps. As always, I am Seven, your guide to the weirder side of the internet. Tonight's episode is the second in our series dedicated to sleep, and without further ado, I present to you for your listening pleasure, How to Beat the Sandman by Red Nova Tyrant. Having difficulty staying awake there? Trying to study for some big exam? Finish some last-minute assignment that you've put off all week, and now it's 3 in the morning and you're absolutely exhausted? Or perhaps you were in a similar state recently and are looking for help on what to do. Well, friend, I have just the prescription to ease your weary mind. All you need to do is win a game. Setting up the game is relatively simple. All you need is an hourglass, a candle, and a marker. Let me make one thing specifically clear. You need an hourglass, not one of those rinky-dink 30-second pieces of shit you get out of a cereal box or a board game. Before playing the game, test your hourglass to make sure that it takes an hour or slightly longer to drain out all of the sand from one section to the other. Having it take slightly longer will help, but too long or too short and you'll run into complications during the game, and you must also be completely alone in the room while playing. When you are ready to play the game, choose any room that can be sealed, simply meaning that all doorways and windows can be closed. Any other form of timekeeping device or alarm must be taken out of the room prior, or the game will not begin. The hourglass will be your only time-tracking tool, hence why having an accurate hourglass is important. Anything with an electronic display should also be removed. This includes TVs, cell phones, computer monitors, anything. Leaving them in the room during the game will put you at a massive disadvantage. You may begin the game at 8 p.m. Make sure the room is sealed, drawing the curtains to block any outside light, then draw a simplistic hourglass shape on the back of one of your hands. Make sure to remember well which hand it was, since you'll mostly be in the dark for this game. Take the candle and light it, and then turn off all the lights, and sit down on the floor with the 3 previously mentioned objects close together, and flip the hourglass so that the sand begins to fall into the empty half. The only source of light should be your candle. Now yell something along the lines of, "I'm not tired, and I refuse to go to sleep." Close your eyes to the count of 10 and then open them again. You won't be entirely sure, but somewhere in the room you'll think you can see the shadowy outline of a man. You have now begun the game, and your opponent is none other than the master of sleep himself, the Sandman. Do not provoke him, and don't speak to him either. You've challenged him and in a way insulted him about his profession, so he's not in the best of moods to say the least. Now comes the game. Your task is to stay awake as long as possible to a maximum of 8 hours, which will take you to about 4 a.m. Every hour you must flip the hourglass to reset it and keep the game going. And each time you flip the hourglass, you may take the marker and draw a tally mark on your arm. The specifics of which arm you mark will be explained later, and don't think you can just flip the hourglass 8 times really quickly or just draw 8 lines on your arm. The hour needs to pass in order for the magic to work. If you fail to flip the hourglass before the last grain of sand falls, or should you succumb to sleep, you will lose. During this time, the Sandman will be deploying as many tricks as possible to get you to fall asleep or to give in. See, the bottom half of your hourglass at any time represents his power, and the more sand in it, the stronger his influence will be. Almost immediately upon starting, you will begin to feel drowsy. This is merely his presence. If you can't last against this, stop playing immediately. During the first hour, he won't do a lot. He may walk around the room, but he won't touch or speak to you. Even if you try to talk to the being, which is something you should really avoid, there will be no response. Also, do not move from your spot to approach him. The closer you get, the more drowsy you will become, and if you're not near your candle, he may put it out so you can go to sleep. Do not distract yourself during this time. You may easily lose track of time and forget to flip the hourglass on time. The Sandman can also skew your perception of how much time has passed, but he cannot affect the hourglass, so keeping your focus on that is the best chance of winning. Side note, if you try to leave the room, you will find that the doors are all locked and the windows reveal nothing but an unyielding darkness as far as you can see. After you pass the first hour, the Sandman may scoff but will continue to stay in the room. Now, he will begin to pull more from his bag of tricks. He's seen that you are going to be a hard one to put down. The sound of music boxes and harps may be heard, at first from a distance, but will slowly grow to a level that would be audible and comforting. Resist the urge to close your eyes and listen. Your body will grow weary as you approach hour 2 or 3, depending on how the Sandman is feeling that night. Around this point, he will be speaking to you in many voices, the soft voice of a young girl, the wise cackling laugh of a grandparent, or perhaps even in the ever-loving, recognizable words of your own mother. They will try to congratulate you on surviving for so long with the Sandman, for braving sleepless days and nights to win this game. Whispers of lullabies and nursery rhymes will fill your head, but you know better. Say nothing and ignore the voices. No matter how real they may seem, don't listen to them and do not go to sleep. If you manage to make it to the halfway point and now have 4 marks on your arm, you'll be nothing less than exhausted, and the Sandman will be nothing less than enraged. He will begin to manipulate your environment even more and start using new tactics to get you to sleep. Instead of trying to lull you to sleep, he will attack you. Hallucinations will occur. You'll see horrifying images of the dead hanging from the ceiling, flashed by a spotlight of unknown origin. The room may start to close in and then stretch out and close in again and stretch back out. A whisper in your ear will turn into shouting in your face from an invisible source. Already weakened and sleep-deprived, your remaining energy will be drained in bursts from his terrors. You may have sudden adrenaline rushes, sure, but the Sandman is clever. He'll time them so that you can't just survive to the next hour by simply being anxious. He'll wait until your emotional state has fallen just another level lower, and then bam, 2 rotted feet dangling in front of your face. You can scream all you want, and you can beg him to stop, but this will only use up more of your ability to function. At the 6-hour mark, the hallucinations will shift between horror and comfort, while the Sandman will begin to pick your brain and find out what nightmares caused you to come to a cold sweat many a night. Others will coax you towards warm slumber, claiming that you've put up with enough and that you deserve your rest. A warm bed to tuck yourself into, a pillow made from the softest furs and feathers. The harps and music boxes will start to overload your sense of hearing. In your state, you may welcome the chance to sleep, but snap out of it. Have you been watching the hourglass? Make sure his terrors aren't distracting you. This is why you don't talk to the Sandman, for every tiny detail about yourself you give him, he will use against you here. This is also the part where electronic displays can become a massive problem. They will turn on regardless of whether they are powered or not, and should you gaze upon their mystifying image for too long, your eyelids will droop and your body will collapse onto the floor. If you had just turned the screens away, the Sandman might use some muscle and turn it back towards you so you can get a better view. The curtains may open to a brilliant dawn or to a clear blue sky, but the only truths in this room are your arm and the hourglass. Unless you have 8 marks, this game is not over. Use any ounce of strength you have to flip that hourglass, which is now an immense chore from the Sandman's influence. Scrawl a line down your arm with the marker, even if it looks like you're taking a knife and slashing your own arm open. During the final hour, the Sandman will begin to address you directly, asking questions that appear to be simple, but as you are, you can't even remember what 2 plus 2 equals. A question is the hardest thing to get out of your head, so don't let it get in. Cover your ears and just watch the hourglass. Keep those eyes open and don't fall asleep. If the question gets in your head, you'll start to think about it, adding more stress and draining you of what little mental will you have left. It might become hard to breathe, as if something is squeezing your lungs or the air is dense and hard to take. The Sandman will also get physical, grabbing you or throwing you across the room, leaving you to crawl back to the hourglass before time is up. If you catch a glimpse of his face, it may be enough of a nightmare to haunt you and keep your eyes from shutting. There will be no distinguishable facial features, save 2 bloody eyes, the lids torn from the sockets, endlessly staring. If you can't take it anymore at any point before the 8th hour is completed, take the hourglass and break it with all of your might. Both sections must be broken for the game to end, and for your sake, I hope it was made of glass. Anyone who has made it to the 7th hour mark has never had the strength to successfully break it and either carried on or surrendered to their dreams. You will not receive a reward for ending the game in this way, save the mercy of avoiding the Sandman's wrath. If you do make it to the end of the 8th hour without falling asleep, you will not need to flip the hourglass again. Simply make the 8th mark on your arm and close your eyes. Though you ended the game, you cannot sleep just yet. There's one final task remaining. All you must do is wait for the Sandman to collect the hourglass and say, "You're all grown up now. Sleep when you wish." Open your eyes and find that the hourglass is gone and the candle put out. Now you may collapse and slumber, a 12-hour slumber to be precise. The game puts a heavy strain on your mind and body, so recovery is necessary. But it's the last sleep you'll ever need, or at least to that length, because once you've fully recovered, you will be able to stay awake for an extra hour for each tally mark on your arm. Depending on your normal sleep schedule, this may mean that you only need a small nap, or maybe an hour or two at most, but for some, you'll never need to lie down again. Sure, you will have the ability to do so if you want to. You can even still dream, but there will never be any weariness following you. Just think of how productive you can be. But it's not all sugar plums and gumdrops. If you mark any tallies on the arm that was not marked by the hourglass, you will instead require more sleep, 1 hour for each tally on the blank arm to be precise. You will require more rest to be able to function throughout your day. Now, these marks can cancel out with the ones on your marked arm, but if that's not the case, you may just have gone through all of that suffering only to come out worse than before. And what with your delirious state throughout the game, it's unlikely for the average individual to come out with all of their tallies on the marked arm. There are also the circumstances of losing. If you fail to flip the hourglass, then the Sandman will gain full power, and with a snap of his fingers you will collapse to the ground. Regardless of how you fall asleep, be it by failure of the hourglass or succumbing to your own tiredness, you will sleep for 12 hours to recover. But it will be the worst sleep you will ever have, and the Sandman will make damn sure that's the case. Your worst nightmares will flood your mind, leaving you unable to escape or wake up in a relief-filled cold sweat. All you can do is endure the torture of a dream that feels like years in length. And when you finally come to consciousness the next morning, there you will be, lying on the floor of the room, the marks still on your arm and blood flowing from where your eyelids once rested. You said you refused to close your eyes and to go to sleep, and the Sandman has simply granted that wish. The horrors of this world do not go away when we close our eyes. In fact, when we sleep, we often leave ourselves in the clutches of one of the most terrifying mechanisms known to man, our own imagination. Where do you run, and where do you hide when it's your own mind tormenting you? It was a wonderful day in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The weather was cloudy yet warm, and the quiet rustling of leaves expressed the transition of summer into autumn. Marco was grateful that he could spend some time with his family, considering how busy he has been because of work. He is a consultant that operates in the oil fields in Tulsa, and the business is booming right now. He was finally able to go on his typical 2 weeks on, 1 week off, and he decided to take his family to the lake at Woodward Park for the day because of the beautiful outdoor weather. Fortunately, most people were working at this time of the day, therefore it was not crowded or overpopulated. The laughter of young children filled the air, and the smell of the outdoors welcomed his family. Marco's wife Audra and children Valencia and Zenon were having a blast. Zenon was throwing leaves all around, and Valencia was running around with a young girl whom she had just met. He and his wife were on a one-on-one romantic stroll through the park while the kids played. "It's so great to have you home, honey. We have really missed you more than anything," Audra soothed. "I know, baby. I really miss the feeling of all of us being together," he responded. She put her head onto his chest and wrapped her arms around his waist. As always, the wonderful smell of lavender infiltrated his nose as his head rested upon her shoulder. "Almost abruptly," she claimed, "the sun is beginning to set, and we should go ahead and head home before it becomes too dark." "I agree. I'll go get the kids, and we can go home." And with that, she kissed him swiftly, and he called Valencia and Zenon to the car. At home, Marco was in a hurry to get things done because it was already getting late and it was a school night for the kids. He swiftly made some spaghetti, and everyone was showered and in their pajamas by 9 p.m. While laying on the soft, sinking couch, Valencia and Xenon began dozing off. Marco told Valencia and Xenon to go lay in their own beds, though. He went into each of their rooms and kissed each of them goodnight, and then he and Audra retreated to their bed to sink into the tranquility of sleep. Marco pulled the covers up onto him and wrapped his arms around his wife while drifting into the world of dreams. In the depths of night, Marco awoke with fluttering eyes. He leaned forward and unwrapped the covers. On the nightstand to his left, he glanced at the digital alarm clock. The time read 11:24. Marco shrugged it off and laid back down, covering himself with silk bed sheets. A loud crash is heard from somewhere in the house, and Marco shoots up instantaneously. Audra stirred and slowly awoke. "Honey, what was that noise?" she softly spoke with a bit of a tremble. "I have no clue. I will go investigate." Marco froze mid-sentence when he heard the earth-splitting screech of Valencia's scream. He sprinted to her room, and when he arrived in the doorway, he merely froze in disbelief. There, sprawled out on the floor, was his daughter, mutilated and ripped apart. He roared with despair and enragement. Her stomach was exposed as a sixth-grade frog would be during a dissection lecture. Her face, her beautiful face, was bashed in, the corner of her bedpost dripping with the blood of her innocence. He could no longer stand the sight and vomited onto the floor, knees buckling beneath him. It then hit him like a wave of despair that he still had 2 other people in the house with some potential maniac. As he got up to check on his son, he blacked out. The blur of life infiltrated his vision when he awoke again. This time, however, he was not in the safety of his bed. He was tied up and the back of his head was throbbing. His eyes lightly focused on his surroundings and the room that engulfed him. The towering concrete walls rose beside him. His bare feet roughly scraped the floor as he swayed forward and backward slightly. And with each sway, he began to notice some liquid touching his big toe. Then it clicked almost instantaneously that he was tied up in his own basement. As he glanced to his right, he was horrified to see his daughter again sprawled on the floor of the basement. Only there was a disturbing, significant difference. She had a forced smile implanted on her misshapen face with staples. Marco vomited again, only this time it went all over his own body because he was hanging from a rope. To his right, he saw his son sprawled onto the floor almost identical to his sister. He had the same forceful smile. However, unlike his sister, his face was still intact. Although his body was ripped apart, his arms and legs were dismembered from the body and scattered across the bloody floor of the basement. If he wanted to, Marco could probably touch the hand of his son with his bare foot. And then he saw his wife. She was tied down to a chair in front of him. Her face was inflamed from a beating, her eyes were swollen, and her gaping throat was exposed. 3 masked people, 2 men and 1 woman based on stature, entered the basement with a bang. "Hello, Marco," the woman spoke maliciously. "What is it you want from me?" Marco desperately pleaded. "What do we want? We want to extend our freedoms. We want to show society that it is blinded by fantasies that envelop the lives of everyone. Americans hope for the best in everything, and yet they fail to see that the weak are left to die in the dark. Humankind is selfish in every way, and we want everyone to know that the wealthy, joyous families are just as weak as those poor and broken. We have been closely watching you and your family for weeks now, and we feel that your family would be the perfect participants for our broadcasting," she excitedly spoke. "Participants? What do you mean? What do you want out of us?" And with a quick motion, one of the men opened his mouth and the other sliced the front half of his tongue. Marco tried to scream, but all that was released was gurgles from the tremendous amounts of blood pouring from the other half of his tongue. The taste of copper exploded in his mouth, and he realized at this moment he had absolutely no control of the situation. Hope was lost, and no one could save him. "Shh," the woman cooed as she approached his wife. One of the men handed her a stapler, and all Marco could do is silently stare as the woman stapled through Audra's mouth, forming a forceful smile, just as the rest of the family. Marco made a futile attempt to sob as blood filled his mouth to the brim, and all he could do was spit. His vision began to blur once again as the woman approached him. As she walked towards him, his heart collapsed with each step. Each agonizing second seemed to last an eternity in his mind, and all he felt was despair. "Don't worry. All we want you and your family to do is smile." She spoke with absolute malice. "Smile because you are the representation of our new world." She then smiled, and not a smile of comfort or tranquility, but rather one of pure enjoyment, one a child would form after stealing and eating a piece of candy. As she smiled, a single tear fell from Marco's eye as he stared deep into her eyes and blacked out for the last time. Marco awoke with a start. He launched out of his bed screaming, and Audra awoke panicking and trying to calm her husband down. Finally, she was able to comfort him and tell him that it was only a dream and not to worry. He settled down and relaxed a bit. That was until he heard an ear-piercing crash. He quickly exchanged his look to the digital clock on the nightstand. It read 11:25. Reality becomes blurred at the edges of sleep. Reality and dream intermingle so seamlessly that even the best trained minds can be fooled. As adrenaline rushes through your body, you must remain cautious, and you must act with caution, and you must always remember that at any given point, you are only 7 steps away from being one of my stories.